Something just went down with Camron and Jey Uso that has the entire wrestling world questioning what's real and what's straight up chaos. Because one minute, Cam is talking reckless like he's about to run Vegas, saying Jey Uso isn't leaving WrestleMania without seeing him, and the next minute? Nothing. No fight. No face-off. No payoff. Just silence. But here's where it gets even more confusing. Cam didn't just back out quietly. According to him, he actually showed up. He claims he was ready for that smoke, ready for that moment, until police allegedly stepped in and shut everything down before he even got close to the arena. So now the internet is split right down the middle. Was Cam really blocked at the last second? Or was this whole thing carefully staged from the beginning to build hype for something even bigger? Because let's be real, the energy leading up to this wasn't normal. The slamming incident, the back-and-forth interviews, the threats, the timing right around WrestleMania, it all felt too perfect. Too calculated. Like something scripted but disguised as real tension. And then you've got Jey Uso, who stayed locked in at the event like nothing happened, almost too calm for someone who is supposedly being hunted. That's why people are saying this isn't over. Not even close. Now Cam is talking about pulling up somewhere else, shifting locations, changing the battleground completely, which only adds more fuel to the fire. So the real question is simple. Was this a real beef that got shut down at the last second? Or are we watching one of the most strategic hype builds in wrestling entertainment history unfold in real time? Either way, something bigger is definitely coming next. Right after that chaos started building online, the story didn't slow down, it escalated. Because according to Camron, this wasn't just talk anymore. This wasn't internet hype or interview energy. He claimed he was actually outside, in real time, ready to confront Jey Uso at WrestleMania weekend. And in his version of events, things only stopped because law enforcement allegedly stepped in before anything could even unfold. Now that alone changes the entire tone of the situation. Because if Cam is telling the truth, then this isn't just wrestling storyline energy. This becomes a real-world confrontation being controlled before it hits a breaking point. But if he's not, then it raises another question entirely. Was this all performance designed to blur reality and entertainment? Either way, the internet didn't care about the nuance. People immediately locked in and started dissecting every clip, every post, every statement. And what made it worse, or better depending on how you see it, is that Cam didn't back off the narrative. He doubled down. He made it clear that he wasn't hiding, he wasn't scared, and he wasn't done. According to him, he was blocked just a couple of blocks away from the arena. That detail is what really set social media on fire, because it painted this image of a near-miss collision between two worlds, hip-hop aggression and wrestling theatrics, about to collide in real time. But here's where things start to get complicated. Because Jey Uso never really reacted the way people expected him to react. No panic. No visible concern. No major escalation outside the scripted environment. Instead, he stayed locked into WrestleMania energy, performing, interacting, and carrying on like nothing external was disrupting his world. And that contrast is exactly what fueled suspicion. Fans started asking, if someone was truly hunting you down, would the response really look this calm? Or is this exactly what happens when two industries, wrestling and hip-hop, intentionally blur the line between reality and storyline? Meanwhile, Cam kept pushing his narrative further. He didn't just say he was blocked, he also made it clear he was still outside afterward, still willing to meet up later, still willing to confront J&A. Different location. That shift alone is important because it moves the situation from WrestleMania confrontation to ongoing personal rivalry. And that's where things start feeling less like a one-time moment and more like a developing storyline. Because now the setting doesn't matter anymore. It's not about WrestleMania. It's not about the arena. It's about who shows up, where, and when. And that's dangerous territory for any situation that has even a hint of real tension behind it. But let's step back for a second. Because before this WrestleMania weekend even happened, there was already history building between Cam and Jey Uso. It didn't come out of nowhere. It started with interviews, commentary segments, and offhand remarks that slowly escalated into personal shots. What began as entertainment quickly turned into ego clashes, the kind that audiences love but insiders always watch carefully. Then came the physical moment everyone keeps replaying. The slam. The moment Jey Uso grabbed Cam and physically put him down on live content. That's the turning point where things stopped being just words. Because in wrestling culture, once physicality enters the picture, even in a controlled environment, the perception of real conflict changes instantly. From that moment on, every interaction between them carried weight. Every comment felt loaded. Every appearance felt like setup. So when Cam started talking about showing up at WrestleMania, people didn't dismiss it as noise. They believed it could actually happen. And that's where the hype spiral began. Now, according to Cam, security stopped him before he could even reach the venue. But no official footage confirmed that moment in the way he described it. That gap is exactly why the internet split in two directions. One side believes Cam's version, that he was physically prevented from entering and intentionally blocked out of a major wrestling event. The other side believes it's all part of a controlled narrative, something designed to extend attention, build anticipation, and stretch this storyline into something bigger than a single WrestleMania moment. And honestly, both arguments have weight. Because in today's entertainment landscape, especially where wrestling intersects with celebrity culture, reality is rarely clean-cut. Everything is layered. Everything is performative to some degree. But what makes this situation stand out is the emotional intensity behind it. Cam didn't just joke about showing up. He sounded like someone who genuinely expected a resolution that night. And when that didn't happen, instead of backing down, he redirected the energy, saying the confrontation could still happen later, at another location, on another stage. That kind of mindset keeps the tension alive. It doesn't resolve anything. It extends everything. And that's exactly why fans are still talking about it days later. Because there was no closure. No final moment. No official confrontation. Just build-up and delay. And in entertainment, delay is sometimes more powerful than resolution. Because it keeps the audience watching. Keeps them guessing. Keeps them invested. Now, as this situation continues unfolding, one thing is clear. Neither side has fully stepped away from the narrative. Cam is still speaking on it. Fans are still debating it. And Jey Uso remains positioned at the center of it all without breaking character or reacting outside his professional lane. Which leads to the biggest question of all. Was this ever meant to explode at WrestleMania, or was WrestleMania just the beginning of a much longer storyline? Because right now, the story isn't ending. It's expanding. So after all that build-up, after the claims, the tension, the supposed near-WrestleMania confrontation, things didn't settle down. They actually got louder. Because the moment Camron doubled down on saying he was blocked from the venue, the conversation stopped being about what happened and started becoming about what is really going on behind the scenes. And that's where the situation takes a different turn. Because now fans aren't just watching two personalities clash, they're trying to decode whether this is real conflict, controlled storytelling, or something that exists in that blurry middle space where wrestling entertainment and real-life ego meet. Cam kept his stance consistent. He didn't retract anything. Instead, he started shifting the narrative from WrestleMania specifically to a broader challenge, basically implying that if it didn't happen there, it could happen anywhere else, anytime, as long as Jey Uso shows up. That alone changes the structure of the entire situation. Because now it's not tied to one event anymore. It becomes open-ended. And open-ended tension is the kind that keeps audiences engaged far longer than a single moment ever could. Meanwhile, Jey Uso stayed in a completely different lane. No public escalation. No direct response that broke character or disrupted his WrestleMania presence. He remained locked into the professional wrestling environment, which ironically made the contrast even stronger. Because the quieter one looks more controlled, while the louder one looks more unpredictable. And that imbalance is exactly what fans started analyzing. But then came the real twist in public perception. People began questioning whether Cam actually intended for a physical confrontation to happen in the first place, or whether the entire situation was built around generating attention during one of the biggest wrestling weekends of the year. Because if you step back and look at the timeline, everything aligns almost too perfectly. The initial verbal jabs, the physical slam moment weeks earlier, the interviews, the threats of showing up, the final "I'm outside Vegas" energy. And then, nothing. No verified confrontation. No viral in-ring moment. No surprise appearance. Just claims that it was stopped before it started. That gap between expectation and reality is what fuels speculation. And speculation is what keeps this story alive. Now, while fans were debating authenticity, another layer started forming, the idea that even if Cam was blocked, the situation itself still served a purpose. Because in modern entertainment, especially wrestling-adjacent storytelling, anticipation is sometimes more valuable than execution. A moment that doesn't happen can sometimes travel further than a moment that does. And this situation is a perfect example of that. Because if Cam had actually shown up and confronted Jey Uso in a controlled segment or unscripted chaos, the story would have peaked and ended. But because it didn't happen, it keeps circulating. It keeps being discussed. It keeps evolving. And that's where the tension becomes sustainable. Now, according to Cam's version of events, law enforcement presence near the venue was the reason everything stopped. He framed it as being physically prevented from entering the area, which immediately created a visual narrative in people's minds, him being close enough to see the event, but not close enough to reach it. That detail matters. Because proximity creates frustration, and frustration creates engagement. But here's the problem. There's no universally confirmed public evidence that directly verifies the exact moment he describes in full detail. That uncertainty is exactly what divides opinion. Some people take it at face value. Others immediately classify it as exaggeration or promotional storytelling. And both interpretations are being reinforced by how both sides behave online. Cam continues speaking like the situation is ongoing. Fans continue debating like it's unresolved. And Jey Uso continues operating like none of it is affecting his actual trajectory. That triangle of perspectives keeps everything active. But the most interesting part of this entire situation is what happens in the absence of confrontation. Because when two figures are positioned for a clash and the clash doesn't happen, the imagination fills in the gaps. People start replaying scenarios in their heads. What would have happened if Cam reached the arena? What would have happened if security didn't intervene? What would have happened if Jey actually responded physically outside the scripted environment? Those unanswered questions become the real fuel of the story. And unanswered questions never die quickly online. They spread. They mutate. They turn into theories. Now the narrative has expanded beyond just Cam and Jey. It has become about wrestling security, celebrity access, event control, and the blurred line between performance and reality. Because if someone can claim they were 2 blocks away from a WrestleMania confrontation, then the public naturally starts questioning how controlled these environments actually are. And that's where the conversation shifts from entertainment drama to infrastructure speculation. How secure are these events really? How much of what we see is planned containment versus real unpredictability? And how often do stories get shaped more by narrative need than actual occurrence? These questions don't have simple answers. But they keep the conversation alive far beyond the original moment. Meanwhile, Cam's continued messaging keeps reinforcing one key idea: he still wants resolution. Not necessarily at WrestleMania anymore, but somewhere. Somehow. And that somewhere else angle is what keeps fans watching. Because it means the story is not tied to a single missed opportunity. It's ongoing. But at the same time, Jey Uso remains in a completely separate professional lane, which creates a disconnect between perception and reality. To wrestling audiences, everything feels like build-up. To outsiders, it feels like miscommunication. And to social media, it feels like content. That's why this situation hasn't faded yet. It keeps being reinterpreted depending on who is watching. And that's the key to its longevity. Because once a moment stops being about what happened and starts being about what people believe happened, it no longer needs resolution to stay relevant. It just needs discussion. And this story has plenty of that. So now the situation sits in a strange place. No confirmed confrontation. No official follow-up clash. just ongoing claims, fan theories, and unanswered questions. And as long as Cam continues speaking and fans continue debating, this storyline, whether real, staged, or somewhere in between, is going to keep moving forward. Which leads directly into the final question: if the moment already passed, or never actually happened the way people expected, then what exactly is coming next? So after all the build-up, all the claims, all the near-miss confrontation talk, the situation finally reached its most important stage, the aftermath. And strangely enough, that's where everything became even less clear. Because when fans expected resolution, what they got instead was silence in some places, continued commentary in others, and a growing divide over what this whole situation actually represented. On one side, Camron continued to maintain that he showed up, that he was ready, and that he was stopped just before things could escalate at WrestleMania. In his version, this wasn't hype, it was a real moment that got shut down before it could turn physical or public. On the other side, Jey Uso stayed completely locked into his professional environment, never acknowledging anything beyond the wrestling storyline space, never breaking away from the structure of the event, and never confirming or denying the external claims in any direct, disruptive way. And that silence created a vacuum. Because in entertainment conflicts like this, silence doesn't end a story, it amplifies it. Now fans started doing what they always do in situations like this, breaking it down frame by frame, statement by statement, trying to figure out where reality ends and performance begins. One theory that immediately gained traction was that the entire situation was partially promotional, not fake in the traditional sense, but strategically amplified. In this interpretation, Camron's involvement, the tension with Jey Uso, and the WrestleMania timing were all elements feeding into a larger narrative designed to generate attention across both wrestling and hip-hop audiences. Because when you think about it, the overlap is undeniable. Wrestling thrives on conflict, build-up, and anticipation. Hip-hop thrives on rivalry, energy, and public presence. When those two worlds collide, the result is always amplified beyond normal entertainment cycles. But then there's the opposing theory, the one that treats everything Kim said as literal truth. In that version of events, he genuinely showed up, genuinely intended to confront Jey Uso, and genuinely got stopped due to law enforcement presence and event security intervention. That interpretation paints the situation as something much more grounded and chaotic, not a storyline, but a real-world standoff that never reached execution. And that's what makes this situation so divisive. Because both interpretations can exist without direct contradiction from verified footage or official confirmation of every detail. So the audience fills in the gaps. And those gaps are where the story lives now. Another key point that emerged after WrestleMania weekend was the idea of timing. Why did everything peak right before one of the biggest wrestling events of the year? Why did the claims intensify at that exact moment? Why did the confrontation narrative build so sharply and then drop off so suddenly? In storytelling terms, that structure looks intentional. But in real-world terms, it could also just be coincidence amplified by social media momentum. And that's the problem. Once a narrative gains traction, it stops needing proof to survive. It only needs engagement. Meanwhile, Jey Uso's side of things remained consistent and quiet. He continued operating within his wrestling role, focused on performance, appearances, and maintaining character alignment. That consistency is what made him appear unaffected, but it also made it harder for fans to understand his perspective on the external narrative. Because from the audience point of view, silence can look like avoidance, but in wrestling culture, silence is often part of protecting the storyline structure. And that adds another layer of complexity. Now, let's talk about the biggest unresolved piece, the missed confrontation. Because whether real or not, that moment is the center of everything. Fans expected a clash, expected a face-off, expected some form of resolution. But instead, they got a claim that it was prevented before it even began. That creates a narrative loop. If it didn't happen, why was it so close? If it was real, why is there no definitive public proof? If it was staged, why was it designed to feel so chaotic and unresolved? Each question leads to another question, and none of them close the loop completely. That's why the story is still alive. Because unresolved tension is more powerful than resolution. It keeps audiences returning. It keeps speculation active. And it keeps the characters involved in constant conversation. Now, stepping back from the drama, there's a bigger industry perspective here that can't be ignored. Modern entertainment, especially where wrestling, music, and social media intersect, is no longer confined to a single space. Stories don't live only inside arenas anymore. They extend into interviews, live streams, social posts, and public perception. That means the line between real and performed is thinner than ever. And situations like this sit directly on that line. Because whether or not Cam actually reached WrestleMania grounds, whether or not law enforcement intervened exactly as described, whether or not this was coordinated or organic, the result is the same. People are still talking about it. And in entertainment, attention is currency. Another important angle is how both figures benefited differently from the situation. Camron gained visibility in a wrestling-dominated conversation, pulling hip-hop commentary directly into a mainstream sports entertainment cycle. Jey Uso maintained positioning within a major wrestling storyline environment without needing to directly engage outside interference. In different ways, both remained relevant. And that's something audiences often overlook. Sometimes participation is not about confrontation, but about presence in the conversation. So where does that leave everything? Right now, the situation exists in a suspended state. Not resolved. Not confirmed in full detail. Not fully denied either. Just floating in that space between narrative and reality. And that's why it still feels active even after the event has passed. Because nothing definitive closed it. No final face-off. No official breakdown. No unified explanation that satisfies all sides. Just multiple interpretations competing for dominance. And that's why this story won't disappear anytime soon. Because until one side definitively shuts it down, or until a future moment revisits it directly, the speculation will continue. Fans will keep debating whether Cam was truly blocked or whether the moment was exaggerated. Wrestling audiences will continue analyzing whether this was part of a larger storytelling arc. And casual viewers will continue treating it as one of the most confusing crossover moments between hip-hop culture and wrestling entertainment in recent memory. But one thing is certain, this wasn't just about a missed confrontation. It became about perception, timing, narrative control, and how quickly reality can shift depending on who is telling the story. And now the final question isn't what happened at WrestleMania. It's whether we were ever meant to see the full moment at all. Because sometimes in entertainment, the absence of a moment becomes the story itself. And this one? This one is still being written.